In June 1970, at the Bath End West Showground in Shepton Mallet, we decided to perform Atom Heart Mother, an ambitious composition recently recorded in its entirety and completed with horns, tuba, trumpets, trombones, a cello solo and a 20-piece choir. The composition Atom Heart Mother was assembled in a few rehearsals after our return from Rome, where we were thanks to the kind invitation of Michelangelo Antonioni. Now I don't remember whether we conceived such a long composition or it developed by itself, but we already got along well with this method of work. The title of the album Atom Heart Mother came up at the last minute. While rushing to come up with a name, we looked through the evening papers for ideas and saw an article about a woman who had a baby after being fitted with a pacemaker. The title of this article gave us the name. We also took our show to Europe that month. At the very least, we have already learned how to cope with the orchestra. However, there were still a lot of opportunities for various crises. For example, at one concert in Aachen, having arrived and installed the equipment, we found that all the scores were left at home. So we called Tony Howard in London and gave him the mission to get them on the next plane. Determined to save face, we fumbled under the guise of an endless sound check. Well, on the other hand, they certainly impressed the wind players with our striving for perfection. We interrupted the protracted studio work on Atom Heart Mother for a short French tour and took the chance to meet Roland Petit, director of the Marseille National Ballet. We originally stayed at a hotel by the sea in Cannes. It turned out to be a real vacation. We learned to water ski under the guidance of a mighty Frenchman who easily kept the students from falling. This man's vast experience in water skiing was somewhat spoiled by his poor knowledge of English. Then we went to the Riviera and played some festival sets in pretty pine-lined locations overlooking the Mediterranean. After playing at the Antibes Jazz Festival, we rented a spacious villa near Saint-Tropez where the main crew, band, and management, plus families, could live while we performed in Fréjus and other resorts on the Côte d'Azur. Those were relatively low-budget times, and the house we rented did not overlook the ocean, but was hidden on the shore, in the thick of some bushes. Rest and recuperation were rather short. The American tour that followed almost immediately after the French tour coincided with the release of Atom Heart Mother, and we felt compelled to repeat our orchestral experience. By that time, the novelty of American tours had faded and they were becoming more routine. On the first American tour in 1970, the most significant event was a concert at the Fillmore East in New York. Bill Graham doubted we could fill a 3,000-seat theater, especially since our last gig in that city was in a club with only 200 seats, refused to promote and simply rented the venue to us for $3,000. There was a full house in the hall. The performance at the Fillmore East was significant for two other reasons. One day we kicked a bunch of sleazy guys out of the dressing room and only later found out that they were members of the band, Bob Dylan's backing band, which included Robbie Robertson and Levon Helm. Of course, the band were famous artists themselves. The May 1970 tour of America came to an abrupt end when all of our gear, packed into a rental truck parked in front of the Orleans Hotel in downtown New Orleans, was stolen during the night. Fortunately, the Orleans was the most luxurious hotel of that tour. Since fate doomed us to be in a stalemate, it was better to survive the hardships here. Another advantage was that the excellent swimming pool on the ground floor terrace was served by very attractive girls who Somewhat diluted our grief with free drinks at the bar. Even more useful, one of these girls' boyfriend was with the FBI and came to see if he could help. With the utmost tact, the FBI man said that the local police could take on the case much more vigorously if we offered them a reward. We left this problem to Steve. To our great amazement, the equipment was found a day later. Only a couple of guitars were missing. Obviously, the city operated an ingenious police squad that provided turnkey services, take everything out and bring everything back. The only mystery was the amount of remuneration for the policemen who returned our equipment. The proposal of the law enforcement officers themselves, expressed in the form "let your conscience tell you," did not help much, because conscience suggested that they did not deserve anything at all. However, we quite pragmatically reasoned that we might one day return to New Orleans. Although we received our equipment back, we decided not to resume the already cancelled shows and returned home immediately. After the fall American tour Atom Heart Mother, we went on an English tour, which lasted until the end of the year. We wanted a full load, but we hardly realized how exhausting it was. However, in early 1971 we turned our full attention and energy to a new album, which began production in January at EMI Studios. With no new songs, we invented countless exercises to speed up the process of creating musical ideas. For example, everyone played on their own track without any connection to what the others were doing. We agreed on the basic structure of the chords, but the tempo was random. We just set the tone. The first 2 minutes are romantic, the next 2 are tempo. Several weeks passed, but nothing of particular value appeared, certainly no finished songs appeared. What little we acquired should only be taken as working ideas. After Nothings we moved on to producing the liner notes of Son of Nothings, followed by Return of the Son of Nothings. The last phrase eventually became the working title of the new album. As a result, the most useful thing was just the sound, a single note taken on the piano and played through Leslie's speaker. This curious device has a rotating horn, and it amplifies a single sound. The horn, rotating at a variable speed, creates a Doppler effect. This is how a car passing by the listener at a constant speed seems to change tone as it approaches and recedes. We ran the piano through Leslie's speaker, and Rick's wonderful note sounded like the sound of a submarine detecting sonar. We were never able to recreate it in the studio, especially this particular resonance between the piano and Leslie's speaker, and for the album we used a demo that gradually faded into the rest of the sound. Combining that note with David's sad guitar lick inspired the whole song that eventually developed into Echoes. Its final, slightly sinuous form produced a rather pleasant feeling of some kind of slowly unfolding, extended structure. It all felt like a genuine development of techniques that were only hinted at in A Saucerful of Secrets and Atom Heart Mother. And this composition was clearly much more controllable than the hell we encountered when recording Atom Heart Mother. Now we could mix using the fades on the console. The guitar sound in the middle section of Echoes was created by David by accident when he plugged in the wah pedal backwards. Sometimes great sound effects are the product of a stroke of genius, and we were always ready to consider whether something like that would be suitable for recording. Our experiments were either brave radicalism, or a monstrous waste of valuable studio time. Either way, they taught us techniques that might seem completely silly at first, but eventually lead to something useful. One still untapped experiment of the time was the study of back-to-back vocals. A phrase written letter by letter backwards and then spoken will not sound correct when reversed, but a phrase written down and then played backwards can be learned and quoted. Once again played backwards, it produces a very strange effect. I remember the word neagatalof, it meant fooled again. The final version of Echoes, lasting 22 minutes, took up an entire side of the album. The composition One of These Days was built around the sound of the bass guitar, which Roger passed through the Lotion Benson Ecorsi. Benson has been a mainstay of our sound for many years. We've been using it since the Syd Barrett era, most notably on Interstellar Overdrive, Astronomy Domini, and Pow RTOCH, and it's only been digital technology that has replaced Benson. In it, the main node was a rotating steel drum surrounded by magnetic heads. You choose different heads, you get a whole range of patterns of the incoming signal on repeat. The sound was terribly dirty, but hissing is easier to put up with if you call it white noise. There were various alternative echo machines that were similar in technology but lacked the same sound quality. Made in Italy, Benson was, however, very fragile and could not cope with the hardships of touring life. The bass line on One of These Days was played in unison by Roger and David. One of the basses needed new strings, and we sent someone from the touring crew to the West End to restock. He left and disappeared for 3 hours, and we managed to finish recording with the old strings. When the tour crew member finally returned, we suspected that he was visiting his girlfriend, who ran the boutique. His assurances of his own innocence were undermined by the fact that he was wearing brand new damn trousers. The song included an uncharacteristic bass solo and a rare example of my vocals, and now it remains an example of an experiment that survived the laboratory phase. We recorded the vocals at double speed falsetto, and then slowed down the tape. We did not look for easy ways. The titles of other songs on the first side of the album are very closely related to our life at that time. San Tropez, the song that Roger brought in finished and ready to record, was inspired by Floyd's summer trip to the south of France and the house we rented there. Roger, Judy, Lindy, and myself were playing mahjong endlessly at that time, and this move gave rise to the name A Pillow of Winds, as one of the playing combinations in mahjong is called. The word that gave the name of the song Fearless, the football equivalent of the word amazing, also often sounded in our conversations. Finally, the album featured Seamus. It's embarrassing to admit, but this is a humorous song, you can't say otherwise. At the request of Steve Marriott of the Small Faces, Dave looked after his dog, whose name was Seamus. Steve had trained Seamus to howl whenever the music was playing. It made such an impression on us that we connected a couple of guitars and recorded this thing in one evening. Curiously, we pulled off this trick again while filming Live at Pompeii, this time with another dog named Mademoiselle Nobbs. In general, the work on this album brought us untold pleasure. Atom Heart Mother was kind of a sidestep. Ummagumma was a live album mixed with a few solo tracks, and Metal was the first album we've been working on since A Saucerful of Secrets in 3 years. In the studio as a group. It's relaxed, very loose, and Echoes still sounds great to me. Compared to Atom Heart Mother, its predecessor, Metal turned out to be straightforward, it was refreshing. Recording Metal took a lot of time, and not at all because we were stuck in the studio, but quite the contrary, because in 1971 we again had a lot of traveling. Looking at the calendar, I see that in February we toured in Germany, in March in Europe, in May in Britain, in June and July again in Europe, in August in the East and in Australia, in September again in Europe, and in October and November, in the States. Of all the overseas tours, our first visit to Japan, in August 1971, was particularly successful. The record company held a press conference, which we usually hated, and handed us our first gold discs. Pure lies, sales of our records did not deserve this, but we appreciated the gesture. To fill the gap while the metal album was in the works, we made a decision as old as the world, to release a compilation of singles and other scraps. Relics, a bizarre collection of antiquities and curiosities, sported just one original song, Roger's Biding My Time, in which Rick finally made us happy with his trombone playing. The album came out in May, just before our performance at the Crystal Palace Garden Party. It was our first major gig in London in quite some time. After Japan, we went on a short tour of Australia, our first Australian visit, which began with a no-hassle open air at Randwick Stadium, a racetrack in Sydney. The discussion from which the dark side of the moon was born took place at a band meeting around the kitchen table at my home on St. Augustine Road in Camden. When Sid left the band in 1968, Roger was left with the burden of writing most of the lyrics for our songs. David and Rick still only occasionally wrote lyrics. Rick once remarked that if words came out like music and we didn't have to do anything else, then more would be written. On the dark side of the moon, Roger took on this task and did it with dignity. His words enriched the album with the most open and specific lyrics that we could manage up to that time. An early live version of Dark Side was made in a matter of weeks. The first sample of compositions, already called Dark Side of the Moon, a piece for assorted lunatics, although at times we hesitated. Between Him and Eclipse, took place at the Rainbow Theatre in North London over 4 consecutive nights in mid-February 1972. Despite the fact that the live version of Dark Side was well developed, the actual recording of the album stretched throughout 1972. It just so happened that we were constantly distracted not only by our touring commitments, but also a whole host of other projects, the soundtrack to the film Obscured by Clouds, the release of our own film Live at Pompeii, and several performances with Roland Petit's Ballet National de Marseille. Luckily, the Dark Side album proved to be tenacious, and all these distractions did not break him. After a US tour and a few shows in Europe, we finally got the chance to start recording Dark Side in earnest and settled into the Abbey Road studio for the entire month of June. There was an air of confidence in the studio. During that period, we tended to work on the album systematically, track by track, until we happy with everyone. The composition Speak to Me was conceived as an overture and was what, in our opinion, an overture should be, a prototype of everything that is to come. We first tried to extract the opening heartbeat from hospital recordings of real heartbeats, but they all sounded too intense. Then we went back to the possibilities of musical instruments and used a very soft beat on a padded bass drum, which, oddly enough, sounded much more vital, although the average heart rate of 72 beats per minute turned out to be too fast, and we reduced it so that cardiologists would be nervous. The colossal piano chord lasted for more than a minute, we resolutely pressed the volume pedal, and then it was run in the background in reverse, and the overture grew to the next composition. On the run is a heavily reworked instrumental bridge from the live version of the album and, in fact, one of the last tracks we added to the album because we didn't immediately get access to EMS Synthia, the successor to VCS3. The VCS, Voltage Controlled Studio, is an English-made synthesizer invented by Peter Zinovieff and his team at the BBC Radiophonics Workshop, whose Doctor Who theme helped bring pure electronic music to a wider audience, and we used it on some of the tracks on the album Dark Side. However, the VCS did not have a keyboard. The Synthia synthesizer had a keyboard in the lid of the carrying case. Because of this, in the composition on the run we were able to slowly play the gurgling, and then speed it up electronically. For this track, we also made a major foray into Emmy's sound effects library, and in addition, we got another reason to return to the echo chamber behind Studio 3 and record the steps. The music library definitely saved us while we were stuck in the studio. You could always take a break and buy time by going to explore its potential. It also contained a bunch of sound effects that we loved but never got to use. One of my favorites was an effect called crowded wardrobe where you can hear someone opening the cupboard and stuff falling out. We all also really liked Gunga Din, in which the irritated trumpeter is constantly attacked. An arsenal growing in power, clearly intent on wiping the miserable musician off the face of the earth. After each rifle shot, automatic burst, or aerial bombardment, the trumpeter stubbornly continues to play, weaker, but with persistence. However, for the opening clock of time, we did not use archival recording from the library, but elements of a quadraphonic demo recorded by Alan a month or two before the start of work on Dark Side. He then went to an antique watch shop and recorded the true ecstasy of a watchmaker, the beating, ticking, and ringing of alarm clocks. The main intro for this song was invented because the studio had a set of rototomes and we finished it in just a few tries. Rototomes consisted of drum skins stretched on a frame that was mounted on a threaded axle. By changing the tension, the rototomes are tuned just like a tympanum, and a controlled series of tones can be extracted from them. Great Gig was written by Rick and the vocal section seemed to float above the instrumental section. Roger and I recorded the sound of coins for money in our home studios and then brought them to Abbey Road. Us and Them is a lyric composition composed by Rick. There is a saying that music is the space between notes. Perhaps, Us and Them quite elegantly confirms this interpretation. Any color truly brings some respite to the tight sound of the record, contributing to the dynamics and serving as a pause before brain damage. Although the lead vocal duties on the rest of the album were given to David, the vocals on Brain Damage and Eclipse belong to Roger, and this is clear. Illustrates how Roger's voice suited the songs he wrote. The last track, Eclipse, had a huge contribution from live performances even before recording. The original versions of Eclipse lacked true dynamics, but with the gradual development on stage, where every time we needed to end this thing on an increasingly grand note, it gained power and made a suitable finale. Snippets of speech scattered throughout the album were added later. We recorded them in one evening just before the final assembly of the album. Quote by Jerry O'Driscoll, Irish studio janitor, "The moon has no dark side. In fact, it's all dark," helped us finally resolve the issue with the album title. The release of the album was scheduled for March 3, 1973. In the meantime, we managed to release the film Pink Floyd, live at Pompeii, and go on tour in Europe and North America. There, among other things, we performed at the Hollywood Bowl and gave a concert in Canada, where we suddenly discovered that one of our backing vocalists had disappeared without a trace. The reason for the sudden disappearance, as it turned out, was the arrest of this vocalist and her friend for robbing a grocery store. The film Live at Pompeii, which we had conceived a year earlier, was a surprisingly successful attempt at filming our concert program. Opening and closing the program with echoes, we played a full-fledged concert, as if in front of an audience, and shots from the stage were interspersed with fragments of gurgling, smoking and flowing lava, as well as footage of our walk through the volcanic landscape. Commercially, Live at Pompeii was a disappointment, especially given the success of the Dark Side album, and for a long time we received very modest rewards for our efforts. One of our greatest performances was at Radio City Music Hall in March 1973. When it was first built, this hall was a marvel of technology, and for many years the stage lift was classified as a secret, as the technology was borrowed straight from the fighter lifts on American aircraft carriers. The stage itself consisted of 6 sections, each rising 20 feet and then sliding forward. In front of the stage there was a steam curtain, a tube with drilled holes, which covered the stage with a curtain of smoke. We could already go out to the instruments, and the audience was still flowing in single file into the concert hall and saw an empty stage. When the concert began, the smoke dispersed. Because of it we slowly rose with the equipment already installed and ready for work, and police flashing lights flashed on the genie towers. The plate shattered. By April we had already received a gold disc in both the UK and the US. In general, everything happened very quickly. In May, we presented the full show Dark Side at Earl's Court. There were also some additional effects, such as a 15-foot aircraft that, under a tracking spotlight, shot down a wire over the heads of the audience and crashed on the stage in a fireball at the same time as the explosion in On the Run. Movies accompanied the music, including Ian Eames's animation for Time and the Surf from the Crystal Navigator, which we first saw in Australia in 1971. Alas, none of these shows were filmed or recorded on tape. Everyone has their own opinion about why The Dark Side of the Moon sold so well, and still sells. The statistics stunned even those who themselves participated in the work on the album. For example, total sales amounted to over 35 million copies, and, according to estimates, every 4th British family owns an album in one form or another. From 1973 until the moment this is written, Dark Side has barely left the American album charts. I believe that there is more than one reason for such success, just many factors worked together and multiplied the effect. The primary reason, and this is true of any great album, is the power of the compositions. The album Dark Side contains really strong, bright songs. The common theme that connected these songs, the burden of modern life, resonated universally and still captures the imagination. The lyrics are deep and easy for the listener to respond to, yet simple and clear enough to be understood by non-English speaking audiences, which likely contributed to the album's international success. And the musical quality, primarily David's guitar and voice, as well as Rick's keyboards, set the fundamental sound of Pink Floyd. We were comfortable playing this music, it had time to grow up, mature and develop in concert. Dick Perry's saxophone and backing vocals gave the album an extra commercial sheen. By the time of the album's release, hi-fi stereo equipment had just become a commodity and an indispensable home accessory of the 1970s. As a result, record buyers began to appreciate stereo effects and enjoyed any record that was recorded at its maximum potential. Our album was lucky. Dark Side became one of the universal tests. On it people could boast about the quality of their hi-fi systems. The envelope with the catchy symbol in the form of a prism, made in hypnosis, was bright, simple and effective. The record companies behind the album flexed every single mighty marketing muscle they had at their disposal. A dedicated record company is a formidable force, a powerful machine, and no doubt their efforts contributed to the album's success. And for dessert, as one music critic pointed out, Dark Side is great for making love to. Some sex clubs in Holland and Sweden are said to use it as the background music for their shows. It seems to me that when we finished The Dark Side of the Moon, we all understood that this was a very good record, in its entirety, definitely the best of all that we had managed to record by that time.